Jesse James' own descendants watched this movie and said, "That's actually how he died. These are the only Westerns that got history right." Kevin Costner had a problem in the early 90s. Someone else was making a Wyatt Earp movie and he wanted to make his own. So he did what any reasonable person would do. He tried to kill their production before it could start. That other movie was Tombstone, and Costner nearly succeeded in shutting it down so he could make his version first. When that didn't work, he just made his movie anyway and released it 6 months later. Costner's Wyatt Earp starts when Wyatt's a teenager and follows his entire life all the way to Arizona and the famous feud with the Cowboys. Dennis Quaid played Doc Holliday and the whole thing ran over 3 hours. Where Tombstone was flashy and entertaining, Costner's version was grounded, more historically faithful to the actual events of Wyatt's life. It's self-indulgent, sure, but if you actually want to know what Wyatt Earp's life was like beyond the gunfight at the OK Corral, Costner's version is the one that doesn't leave anything out. Walter Hill decided to make a Geronimo movie in 1993, and instead of doing what Hollywood usually does, which is cast whoever and call it a day, he hired Sonny Skyhawk, a Sioux activist, to be on set the whole time. Skyhawk's job was to look at every single actor playing a Native American and verify they had actual tribal affiliation. You couldn't just audition and get the part, you had to prove you were legitimately connected to a tribe. Hill also didn't trust the costume department to get the cavalry stuff right, so he brought in 100 people from Civil War reenactment groups. He put them in the movie as the 6th Cavalry so the uniforms and weapons would actually be correct. Skyhawk said later that the film gave an accurate glimpse of what Geronimo went through. They got the big picture right. Apache lands being squeezed, Geronimo stuck in an impossible situation, the reservation system being a disaster. Where they had to simplify was making it look like one Army officer forced Geronimo to leave the reservation. That's cleaner for a movie, but the truth was way messier. And they also skipped his surrender to General Miles in 1886, which was actually pretty significant. 1878, New Mexico Territory. There was this thing called the Lincoln County War, where businessmen were basically hiring gunmen to murder each other over land. John Wayne plays John Chisum, a real cattle rancher who got caught up in all this. In the movie, there's a land baron, Lawrence Murphy, who's forcing people to sell their property and killing anyone who won't. The local sheriff is in Murphy's pocket, so Chisum ends up teaming with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid to fight back. All those names are real. John Chisum existed. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid obviously existed. Lawrence Murphy was a real businessman in Lincoln County. The basic situation, rival businessmen using violence to grab territory while law enforcement looked the other way. That all happened. And Wayne's version of Chisum is interesting because he's not playing his usual shoot-first cowboy. He's more careful, more fatherly, and that actually fits what we know about the real John Chisum better than if Wayne had just done his standard tough guy routine. In 1988, they decided to make another Lincoln County War movie, except this time it's the Brat Pack playing cowboys. Emilio Estevez is Billy the Kid leading a gang called the Regulators. The movie starts with rancher John Tunstall recruiting Billy and other young guys. Tunstall gets murdered on orders from Lawrence Murphy, and Billy and the Regulators go on a revenge spree that spirals completely out of control. Here's what they got right that most Westerns wouldn't bother with. The Regulators really were deputized at one point. That actually happened, and it's in the movie. It gave them legal cover for what they were doing, and the way everyone looks is surprisingly accurate. Rotting teeth, dirty faces, scraggly beards. People in 1878 New Mexico didn't have great dental care or regular baths. Most Westerns clean everyone up so they look good on camera, but Young Guns leaned into how grimy everyone actually was. Warner Brothers decided to make a movie about Custer in 1941. They cast Errol Flynn, paired him with Olivia de Havilland one last time. This was their final big collaboration together. Flynn plays Custer from West Point through the Civil War and out to the Dakota Territory. De Havilland plays his wife Libby. The movie ends at Little Bighorn, where Custer and his men died. The real Custer was complicated. made bad calls, had a reputation that wasn't exactly heroic. But Warner Brothers wanted Errol Flynn being Errol Flynn, and that meant Custer had to be noble and brave and charming. It worked because Flynn sold it. He and de Havilland had this chemistry from years of making movies together. Audiences showed up to watch them, and whatever liberties the movie took with Custer's actual life didn't matter. You believed Flynn's version because Flynn made you believe it. The real Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid pulled off train robberies in the late 1800s, got famous for it. A railroad company hired a posse to hunt them down, and the two outlaws eventually relocated to Bolivia, where they tried to continue their careers in a different country. When George Roy Hill pitched this as a movie in the late 60s, studios pushed back. Where's the action? The story was mostly about two guys avoiding capture. That doesn't sound like a Western. Hill got Paul Newman and Robert Redford attached, and that changed things. Newman played Butch with this easy charm, Redford played Sundance as his cooler counterpart, and suddenly you had a movie where the historical truth felt like an act of defiance rather than desperation. The film sticks to the real story. They rob trains, get hunted, decide to relocate to Bolivia, but Newman and Redford made you root for them. A revisionist Western that worked because the two leads had chemistry and Hill found the right tone. Redford came back 3 years later for another Western about a real person. Jeremiah Johnson was a 19th century mountain man who lived in the Rockies and worked as a trapper. The movie's upfront about it. This is loosely based on Johnson's life, but what it captures is what that life actually meant. Johnson's out there alone for long stretches. He finds a family, loses them, goes on a revenge spree that turns him into this mythic figure in the mountains. The legend of Jeremiah Johnson was about a man who chose the wilderness over civilization and paid for it with his humanity. Redford's by himself for huge chunks of the movie. There's no dialogue, just him in the wilderness. That's hard to pull off, but he does it. You feel the isolation, the way Johnson had to cut himself off from everything to survive out there. Warner Brothers thought they were getting a Brad Pitt action movie. They had Pitt at the peak of his career playing Jesse James, Casey Affleck playing Robert Ford, and they figured it would be a shootout-heavy Western with star power. What director Andrew Dominik gave them instead was a meditation on hero worship and disillusionment. Robert Ford idolizes Jesse James at the start, wants to join his gang, thinks he's the coolest guy alive. But the more time Ford spends with his hero, the more he realizes James is just a paranoid, cruel person who happens to be famous. Of course, it's the opposite of what Warner Brothers expected, but it's incredibly accurate to the real story. Dominik recreated the moment Ford killed James with meticulous detail based on everything that's known about how it actually happened. And the real validation came from an unexpected source, the James Family Preservation Trust, run by one of Jesse's actual descendants. They praised the film for its accuracy and said that when you watch Brad Pitt's performance, you're seeing Jesse James as he really was. Here's a question. Why did it take a Taiwanese director to make the most historically accurate Civil War film Hollywood has ever seen? Ang Lee made Ride with the Devil in 1999, and it's about two friends who joined the bushwhackers during the Civil War. The film gets everything right. The costumes match what bushwhackers actually wore. The fighters are correctly depicted as teenagers and young men, not grizzled veterans. Even the medical scenes show how primitive and brutal treatment was back then. The sacking of Lawrence, Kansas is recreated with complete historical accuracy. But what really sets it apart is the authenticity of the firearms and clothing. The young actors look exactly like the young killers they're playing. They're using actual 1851 Navy revolvers and 1858 Remingtons. You can look at historical photographs of these 16 to 20-year-olds and then watch Ride with the Devil and see the same thing. Director Raoul Walsh decided to make a Western about a wagon train traveling from the Mississippi River to Washington State, and he wasn't going to skimp on anything. Fox gave him the budget and Walsh went big. 20,000 extras, including 725 Native Americans, 1,800 cattle, 1,400 horses, 185 wagons. Fox executives watched the opening scenes and said they were the greatest ever filmed in Hollywood up to that point. The film starred a young John Wayne as Brett Coleman, a fur trapper leading the pioneers west on the Oregon Trail, and Walsh captured things that Westerns almost never showed. There's this sequence where they have to lower the wagons down a cliff. Not just the wagons, but all the cargo, the animals, everything. The film shows how grueling and dangerous that process actually was, and it's something you rarely see in Westerns before or since.